The huge upgrade package that Mercedes brought to Monaco didn't disappoint from a single technical point of view, but the real test is yet to come, the Barcelona GP. With the Principality presenting a track that is very specific and not enough for the drivers to extract the optimum of the car, Mercedes managed to get the tactics right and finish solid P4 and P5 after being P6 and P8 during the qualifying session. But will Barcelona be any better for the Silver Arrows? Our aerodynamic expert is back with us, analysing the upgrades of Mercedes and how big an advantage the W14 got from them. Let's start with the front suspension of the W14, which was chosen more for aerodynamic than mechanical reasons, as its role as the bridge between the air coming from the front wing and being directed to the floor and the rear of the car was something the car desperately needed to extract more performance. This is very important for the W14 because one of the biggest issues they had to tackle with this new upgrade was the increased drag due to the impairment of airflow, as the car was running a bit too high and was missing a lot of rear downforce. With the new front suspension, the W14 can now deliver optimal airflow to the rear of the car, which effectively means that when the car is facing slow-speed corners as well as the main straight parts, it will be much more stable and effective. But a single bird does not bring the spring alone, and that is why Mercedes brought the long-awaited Sidepod design, one that is kind of a mixture between what Red Bull and Ferrari have been bringing to the table ever since the 2022 regulation started. Let's hear from Shub himself.
So let's first start with the front suspensions, right? So they've come up with an anti-dive suspension setup, which has two basic reasons. One is mechanical and one is aerodynamics. The aerodynamic reason is that the suspensions are the bridge between the flow field coming from the front wing going into the floor and onto the side pod. So any big flow philosophy change in terms of aero demands an optimization of the front suspension as well to deliver the desired flow field onto the rear end of the car, which is in this case the floor and the side pods itself. Mechanically, what's happening is quite interesting. So as the name suggests, under braking, what the anti-dive suspension does is it reduces the dive of the front end of the car. Now what this allows the car to do is this allows the car to run lower because there is less variability of the pitch of the car under braking, and because it allows the car to run lower, chances are that in these regulations where the floor is very dominant in terms of downforce, you would be able to have run with a higher downforce package, or the floor would be more loaded across a range of conditions as you go through the corner. I mean, why didn't Mercedes think about this to begin with, right? It's not like they don't have smart engineers. They have very capable engineers. But the backdraws of a suspension like an anti-dive suspension is that it reduces the feel of the car to the driver. So it's quite, let's say, it's not very obvious to the driver that the car does not pitch under braking. So it reduces the sensitivity or the dynamic sensitivity that the drivers get, or the feedback that the drivers get from the car as they go through corners. Again, this is not the thing that would basically, close the gap of 2 or 3 tenths to Red Bull, but it is something that maybe fits well with the aero philosophy that the 2023 regulations require, which is namely the wide side pod and the floor being powerful, so providing a stable platform.
Side pods have a great impact on the front wheel wake effectiveness and create an outwash onto the floor edge, but Mercedes has implemented something brand new in their side pod design, which is implementing the sys tube onto it. While the purpose of it is yet to be seen as to whether it's being done out of chassis limitation or purposely boosting the airflow towards the rear of the car, the novelty with Mercedes' sidepod design does not end here, as they have also managed to integrate the vertical cascaded winglet onto the sys tube wing. So how will this affect the performance of the W14 furthermore? Shub has the explanation for you, so let's hear from him.
Pod allows you to manage the front wheel wake effectively and also creates a lot of outwash onto the floor edge, which helps in the extraction of the front floor. And this has other benefits also, but what Mercedes have, which is quite novel about them, is that they've integrated the sys tube wing, or the mid wing, so as we call it, onto the wide side pod philosophy. So this gives them tools that other people don't have to play around with. Now this can again be just a limitation of their chassis and that they've worked around it, or it might be a purpose-driven feature on the car. Another really interesting bit on the car is a vertical cascaded winglet on the sys tube wing itself. And this is extremely interesting because this is almost like a mini barge board, and it almost breaks some of the ideas that the FIA had in terms of wheel wake management. So it's going to be really interesting if they're able to keep this vertical winglet. I'm pretty sure it must be legal because Mercedes wouldn't introduce it without it being legal. However, whether they're able to keep it on the car, is it within the spirits of the rules? We'll find out. But what these are basically doing is, the vertical winglet will cast off a strong vortex, and the sys tube wing or the mid wing is going to cast off another vortex, and these vortices are going to merge together downstream. And then the idea is that can you use this vortex to create downwash onto the side wall of the side pod itself, so that you can direct air through the undercut towards the mouse hole and the rear tire area, that small gap between the mouse hole and the rear tire, where there's a lot of it's a very sensitive area because you can feed the diffuser through this place. You can also manage the rear tire squish from this place, and it has a huge impact on the overall diffuser performance. In addition to that, the top part of the side pod is quite conventional. It looks more like an Alpine McLaren type of top side of the side pod, where the gullies are not as aggressive as Aston Martin, but they are present, and then the airflow going through these gullies are targeted to be delivered towards the beam wing, which is again an important part and controls the efficiency aspect of the entire aero philosophy.
Luckily for us and for Mercedes, we've been able to see where Red Bull gained all of the advantage on the RB19 in Monaco, and it seems like the Silver Arrows have not been sitting around with crossed hands in Brackley, waiting for the sidepod design and the front suspension to do the magic work by themselves. The new floor of Mercedes has a vortex generator and is located very close to the chassis, and it seems like Mercedes was the only team that was capable of doing such an upgrade with that particular sidepod design, because the chassis of W14 is smaller than the required volume. Furthermore, there is one part of the metal chassis that has no regulations whatsoever that the team could play with, but in order to do so, their chassis needs to be a bit thinner than the normal requirements, a box that Mercedes is taking in 2023. What does our expert have to say on this matter? But is this enough to beat Red Bull? After we've seen Perez's car up in the air and compared it with Hamilton's car, the difference couldn't be more obvious. After Monaco, we've been reassured that the advantage Red Bull is gaining in 2023 is mostly coming from the floor, and with the genius mind of Newey working in your garage, you shouldn't be that surprised. Ted Kravitz has spoken about the massive differences between the floors of Ferrari, Mercedes and Red Bull, and when talking about this matter, he's labelled the Maranello and Brackley-based squad's floors as prehistoric compared to the floor that Red Bull has produced for RB19. Furthermore, the Sky F1 pundit said, "Thanks to Sergio Perez, the whole of Formula One has seen the fabled Red Bull floor. Go onto the internet and see for yourself. It is a thing of wonder and beauty, especially when you compare it to the floor of the Mercedes and the Ferrari, which we also saw up on cranes, so we got a full view of it this weekend. They look prehistoric." Now, it's evident that Mercedes are yet to test their floor even further down the line, and this is not the final version of how the W14 will look, with Wolff saying that the real test for the car will be Barcelona, and here, the fans and the F1 world will be able to witness whether the car lacks in certain departments. But what seems to be that different in comparison to the RB19, and is there any way that Mercedes can do exactly what Red Bull has done? Ted Kravitz continued on this matter as he added, "Even the little guide fences have got guide fences of their own on the Red Bull. It's so complex in 3 dimensions, not only in elements coming down, but the curling round, and it's got circles where the vortex start and then the vortices are generated midway through the floor. Then what they're doing with the area under the crash structure and the gearbox as well. Obviously, when you see a team doing well, what you need to do is to try and copy everything but add your own twist to it. However, this might be a mission impossible for the rest of the teams, as Williams' head of vehicle performance, Dave Robson, believes that even if they were able to analyze the flaw out of the picture for days, they wouldn't have come up with a solution of their own because it's just a 2D picture, and making it in the real world is a challenge that not many experts can tackle. What Mercedes needs to do right now is focus more on the floor design and be as creative as they can, because they're working with a narrow chassis, unlike Red Bull. This means that no matter how many vortices you try to create to increase the rear downforce of the car, the narrow chassis is putting a halt to these attempts. But the energy in Mercedes is very optimistic, with Russell saying that everything is going according to plan and that in Barcelona we're going to witness a much more competitive Mercedes than we did in Monaco. This was to be expected after all, given the fact that in Monaco, neither Hamilton nor Russell were able to push the car to its absolute limits due to the nature of the track. But Barcelona is going to be something different. Will Mercedes be able to challenge Red Bull for the win? That's definitely the question we'll be asking throughout the entire week, but as of now it seems like the complex philosophy that's going on the Red Bull's car is something too big of a challenge to overcome for the rest of the grid, as said by Wolff, who added that the car has gone from awful to not good. But the most positive thing waiting for Mercedes, not just in Barcelona, but in the remainder of the calendar, is that they have a good basis to work on and are finally on the right development path. Now, whether those 18 months of developing a car in the wrong direction will prove crucial for the competitiveness in 2023, time will tell, but at least we now have a version of the W14 that will be capable of winning races as soon as this weekend.